Ejike had endured many things in his life, but nothing quite like the endless grind in the United States. As a Nigerian immigrant and former convict, he had struggled to make ends meet, finding work only at a fast food joint under a boss who treated him worse than dirt. It was a far cry from the life he'd imagined when he first set foot on American soil. He had hoped for a fresh start, a new chapter, maybe even a slice of the American dream. But dreams were distant, and reality was harsh. On this particular day, his boss, Frank, was relentless. From morning till night, Frank seemed to have made it his personal mission to criticize, demean, and humiliate Ejike at every turn. Finally, after one particularly biting remark, Ejike felt a snap inside him. He clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and with all the frustration he had bottled up for years, he exploded. "I've had enough of this nonsense," Ejike yelled, throwing down his apron. Frank stood in stunned silence, but Ejike didn't care. For the first time in a long while, he felt a strange sense of freedom as he stormed out of the restaurant. Outside, he lit a cigarette, trying to calm himself. But as the smoke swirled around him, so did his thoughts, and soon panic crept in. What had he done? His stomach churned with anxiety. He was an ex-convict, his record already an anchor, weighing down his chances of finding decent work. This job had been barely enough to cover his rent, bills, and basic needs, but it was something. Now, without it, he was staring at a long, dark road ahead. He was on the edge of a full-blown panic attack when he heard a familiar accent beside him. "Ah, brother, are you okay?" Startled, Ejike turned to see a smiling face with a thick Ghanaian accent. The man introduced himself as Kwaku and had a calm, warm presence. "I'm a regular at that place," Kwaku said, nodding toward the restaurant. "I've seen the way the owner treats you. That wasn't right." They talked for a while, and to Ejike's surprise, Kwaku didn't judge him. Instead, he offered comforting words and a meal from a nearby stall. They met a few more times over the next few weeks, Kwaku occasionally treating him to food and making him laugh with stories from back home. Slowly, Ejike's spirits began to lift. One evening, Kwaku invited Ejike over to his place to play soccer on his PS5. Ejike accepted, grateful to finally have a friend in the lonely city. As they arrived, Ejike's eyes widened at the sight before him. A beautiful house, large and elegant, with a driveway that stretched like a runway. "Kwaku, you live here?" Ejike asked, baffled. "Ah yes," Kwaku chuckled. "This is home." The house was richly decorated with African artwork and luxury furnishings. It was clear that Kwaku had wealth, yet he was humble, choosing to eat at the fast food joint and interact with people of all walks of life. Finally, Ejike's curiosity got the better of him. "Kwaku, forgive me, but why do you eat at that place?" "You could have anything you want," Ejike asked, looking around in awe. Kwaku smiled knowingly. "It's not about where I eat or what I have, Ejike. It's about the people I meet and the connections I make. I was once like you, struggling and fighting to survive. Back then, someone helped me when I was down, a kind stranger who gave me an opportunity. He told me about a place called the Gold Cave in Ghana, a place so rich with gold that it would take many trucks to carry it. But it was hunted by a serpent demon that prevented the gold in the cave from being harvested, and the few who tried never returned. No permits were needed, and if you ventured to come out with any gold you could carry, it was yours to keep." Ejike listened intently, skepticism flickering in his eyes. "Kwaku, a cave full of gold? A serpent demon? That sounds like a fairy tale." Kwaku chuckled. "I thought so too. But there are tales from my ancestors, stories passed down through generations. There are maps and legends. People have tried to find it. Some say the serpent guards the gold fiercely. But those who manage to outsmart it, well, they become rich beyond their wildest dreams." Despite his doubts, something about the story tugged at Ejike's curiosity. Later that evening, as he sat on the train heading home, Kwaku's words replayed in his mind. Was there really a place like that? As the train rocked gently, he pulled out his phone and began to search. With each tap on the screen, his skepticism began to fade. Articles about the Gold Cave popped up, detailing its legendary riches and the dark tales surrounding it. Some spoke of expeditions that had ended in tragedy, while others recounted the few who had returned, clutching small fortunes. A sense of thrill coursed through him. This wasn't just a story, it was a possibility. From that moment on, Ejike couldn't shake the idea. What if he could escape his struggles? What if he could find this cave and claim some of that wealth for himself? The thought consumed him, becoming an obsession. He began to map out a plan, researching everything he could about the gold cave and the region around it. Days turned into weeks, and as he forged a friendship with Kwaku, he shared his growing excitement. Kwaku noticed the spark in Ejike's eyes, urging him to be cautious. It's not just a treasure hunt, Ejike. Many have been lost to their greed. But if you're determined, I can help. Kwaku shared tips on preparing for the journey, how to navigate the terrain, what supplies to bring, and how to face the supernatural stories with respect. You must go with an open mind, but also with wisdom. There are ways to appease the spirits of the land, and I can teach you. As the days went by, Ejike saved up what little money he could, cutting back on expenses and planning every detail. He even learned to cook some traditional Ghanaian meals, hoping to blend in once he arrived. Kwaku was supportive, often reminding him to keep his feet grounded. Finally, the day arrived. With a heavy backpack filled with essentials, water, food, a flashlight, and a map he had drawn from his research, Ejike boarded a plane to Ghana, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. As the plane descended, he could see the lush landscapes of his ancestors, a place that felt both familiar and foreign. Upon landing, Ejike felt an energy he had never experienced before. He met Kwaku at a local cafe where they plotted their route to the cave. Kwaku seemed excited yet cautious. Remember, Ejike, this is not just about the gold. It's about what you're willing to confront, both outside and within. The next morning, they set off at dawn, hiking through dense forests and rocky paths, following the map they had pieced together. Ejike felt a thrill with every step. As they approached the rumored location of the cave, the air grew thick with anticipation. When they finally stood before the mouth of the gold cave, a dark, gaping hole in the earth, a chill ran down Ejike's spine. The entrance was ominous, overgrown with vines and shadowed by towering trees. Kwaku placed a hand on Ejike's shoulder. "This is it. Are you ready?" Ejike nodded, a mix of fear and determination swirling within him. Together, they ventured inside, armed with flashlights and a sense of purpose. The cave had very narrow tunnels, the air cool and damp, echoing their footsteps. As they crouched and navigated their way through the dark cave, their torchlight beam began to reflect on something shiny. Excitement surged through Ejike as he realized they were close. When they got nearer, his breath caught in his throat. There it was, a wall full of gold and statues made of pure gold, glimmering in the dim light like the dreams he'd held onto for so long. In that moment of triumph, as Ejike rushed to gather the gold coins scattered on the floor, he noticed Kwaku had sneaked away. "Kwaku!" he called, but there was no response. A strange feeling crept over him, and when he turned back, a chill ran down his spine. Before him, coiled against the cavern wall, was a massive anaconda, its scales glistening ominously in the flickering light. The creature's eyes were fixed on him, angry and hungry. Panic surged through Ejike, and he felt his heart race as he tried to back away. "Please, Kwaku," he shouted, desperation in his voice. "What's happening?" But Kwaku was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was kneeling, bowing face down before the anaconda, as if in a dark pact. "I have returned again with another sacrifice as promised," Kwaku said, his voice steady yet eerily calm. Ejike's blood ran cold as realization dawned on him. He had been nothing but a pawn in Kwaku's game. The pieces fell into place. Kwaku knew the danger, and he had lured Ejike here for his own purposes. "No, Kwaku, please, don't do this," Ejike pleaded, but Kwaku only smiled, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. The anaconda moved closer, its massive body undulating as it approached. Ejike froze, terror gripping him. He had soiled and shit on himself in fear, and the stench wafted into the air. The anaconda paused, its nostrils flaring, its tongue flicking out to taste the air. "You brought me a sacrifice that has soiled itself and is no longer suitable for me to eat," the serpent hissed, its voice deep and rumbling like thunder. Before Ejike could react, The anaconda lunged. Kwaku's smile faded as the creature wrapped itself around him, its powerful coils crushing him instantly. A sickening crunch echoed through the cave, followed by a guttural scream that cut off abruptly. Ejike could only watch in horror as the anaconda consumed Kwaku whole, its eyes fixed on Ejike, now a mere spectator in a nightmare. The weight of what had just happened crushed Ejike's spirit. He had trusted Kwaku, believed in their shared dream of wealth and freedom, only to be betrayed and left at the mercy of a demon of the cave. In that moment of despair, as the reality of his situation sank in, Ejike felt a flicker of resolve spark within him. He couldn't let fear dictate his fate. The anaconda, sensing his terror, approached him slowly, ready to feast on his panic. Thinking quickly, Ejike grabbed the gold coins he had managed to collect and held them out, trembling. "You want a sacrifice? Take this. I offer you this gold, a gift from your cave," he shouted, voice trembling but firm. The anaconda paused, its eyes narrowing. "You think gold means anything to me?" it hissed, the tone mocking. "It is a soul that I crave, not mere trinkets." The serpent continued, its voice echoing ominously in the cavern. "I can only feast on the souls of those who are truly desperate and frustrated, those who have lost all hope. Bring me such a soul, and I will allow you to leave with your life. For every soul you bring, I will grant you more gold than you can carry." Ejike's heart raced as he processed the serpent's words. A part of him screamed in protest, recognizing the darkness of the bargain being struck. Yet another part, the part that had been drowning in despair and burdened by the weight of his past, felt a flicker of hope. He needed money to start anew, to escape the shadows that haunted him. "I promise," Ejike said, the words tumbling out before he could think them through. "I will bring you a soul. Just let me go." The anaconda's expression softened slightly, as if contemplating the terms. "Very well, human. Pack as much gold as you can carry." With a sense of urgency, Ejike hurriedly filled his bag and Kwaku's bag with gold, the coins clinking together as he stuffed them inside. The serpent watched him with its piercing eyes, seeming to take pleasure in Ejike's desperation as he struggled under the weight of the treasure. As he dragged the heavy bags of gold toward the cave's entrance, he summoned the courage to ask the serpent one last question. "What if I don't come back? Will there be any implications?" The anaconda's response was chilling. "Oh, I have no doubt you will be back for more when you run out of money," it hissed, the tone dripping with condescension. It knew that the only people brave, or perhaps stupid enough to come here, are the desperate. When they get what they want, they always say they will never return. But because their minds are not wired to keep money, they squander it and find themselves back at the door, seeking more gold. Ejike managed to make his way out of the cave, a backpack heavy with gold weighing him down but lifting his spirits. The thrill of newfound wealth coursed through his veins as he sold the gold, transforming his life almost overnight. He became extremely wealthy, indulging in lavish parties, expensive cars, and extravagant homes. Friends flocked to him, drawn by the glow of his success, and for a while he felt invincible. 4 years had passed since Ejike's last encounter with the serpent. In those years, he had tasted unimaginable wealth and squandered it all in his pursuit of a lavish lifestyle. The mansions, luxury cars, and endless parties had drained his riches without a trace, leaving him back where he started, empty and desperate. As the months wore on, Ejike found himself haunted by the echo of the serpent's words. "You will find yourself back at my door." He had promised himself he would never return, that he would never follow in Kwaku's footsteps by luring innocent souls to the belly of the serpent. But his bank accounts were empty, his debts piled high, and despair clawed at him in the silence of each sleepless night. Ejike's frustration was at an all-time high. The weight of his past mistakes, the wasted wealth, and his deep-seated pride gnawed at him. After failing to secure a stable job in his earlier attempts and barely scraping by, he found a new position as a valet in one of the most luxurious hotels in the state. The guests were affluent, driving expensive cars, and the hotel's opulence reminded him constantly of what he had lost. But his arrogance, a byproduct of having been wealthier than most of those he served, led to problems. Ejike found it difficult to be humble. His pride took over whenever he interacted with the guests, especially the entitled ones. His temper flared every time someone treated him with disrespect. His arrogance created tension with his co-workers and eventually escalated with a guest who threw his car keys and tip on the floor for Ejike to pick up. That was the last straw. In a fit of rage, Ejike stormed off the job, vowing that he was done with trying to fit into a world that constantly reminded him of his failures. He had tasted wealth once, and he couldn't stomach the idea of going back to a life of mediocrity. The thought of how he had squandered everything over the past few years haunted him. But the solution was clear. He would return to the cave, bring another soul, and take more gold from the serpent. This time he promised he would be smart with the money, invest it, keep it, and never return to his old ways. He waited until he found someone he could manipulate. His eyes landed on a man named Gregory, a desperate soul whose business was on the verge of collapse. Gregory had borrowed from every bank, and his family had already turned their backs on him. His face bore the marks of defeat and hopelessness. Seeing Gregory's desperation made Ejike's heart race with excitement. He knew the serpent could only feast on those at the edge of their breaking point. Gregory was perfect. Ejike approached him under the guise of offering a solution to his problems. He promised Gregory a way out, a financial breakthrough that would solve all his problems, no questions asked. Gregory, eager and desperate, fell right into Ejike's trap. Without hesitation, Ejike led him to the cave. The serpent greeted them with its usual terrifying presence, and the deal was struck. Gregory, terrified but unaware of the true price, was offered to the serpent in exchange for the gold that Ejike could carry. The serpent devoured Gregory's soul, leaving nothing but a hollow, empty shell behind. Ejike, trembling yet exhilarated, filled his bags with the gold and made his way back to the city. Once again, Ejike became incredibly wealthy. He sold the gold, invested in flashy businesses, and lived a life of indulgence and excess. But he had learned nothing. The arrogance that had destroyed his previous fortune came back, stronger than ever. He squandered money on poor investments, reckless ventures, and luxurious living. As quickly as his wealth had returned, it vanished just as fast, and once again, Ejike found himself in the same place. Empty pockets, rising debts, and despair. This time, however, he didn't learn from his mistakes. He didn't even attempt to get back on his feet. Instead, he saw his return to the serpent as his only way out, his only path to more wealth. And so, he began to repeat the cycle. Each time, Ejike would find another desperate soul, someone barely hanging on to hope, and lead them to the serpent. The process was always the same. He would offer them a false promise of salvation, a way out of their suffering, and then deliver them into the hands of the serpent to be devoured in exchange for more gold. The serpent grew stronger, its hunger for human souls insatiable, and Ejike grew richer, but his soul became darker with each sacrifice. Over time, Ejike's mind twisted. He no longer felt guilt for the souls he offered to the serpent. His only concern was the gold, more and more of it. His humanity, stripped away by greed and desperation, was replaced by a cold, calculating hunger for wealth. He stopped caring about the people he deceived, the lives he ruined. As long as the serpent was willing to reward him with gold, he would keep bringing sacrifices. Ejike's life was a continuous loop of wealth and loss. Each time he grew too comfortable, each time he allowed himself to believe he was untouchable, the gold would slip through his fingers. But that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was the serpent, the gold and the sacrifices he had to make to keep his wealth intact. His morals faded, and he became a monster in his own right, someone who had become nothing more than a puppet to the serpent's insatiable hunger. With each soul he sacrificed, Ejike thought himself untouchable, completely unaware that his past victims had left a trail. Their families, desperate for answers, had reported them missing, sparking suspicion around him. The evidence was thin but clear. Security footage from the airport captured him traveling to Ghana with each victim, and each time he returned alone. The FBI grew increasingly curious. Soon an investigation was set up, and agents, trained to pick up on patterns and gut instincts, tracked Ejike as he prepared to lead another desperate soul on his grim pilgrimage to the Gold Coast. This time, though, he was being followed. The journey to the cave was tense, with Ejike blissfully unaware of the agents lurking in the shadows, tailing him at a distance. They watched as he led his newest victim, an innocent man barely clinging to hope, deep into the heart of the jungle, through the narrow paths, until they reached the ominous cave. The FBI agents crept closer, silent and vigilant, their eyes wide as they saw Ejike step forward, calling forth the Serpent Demon. The ground trembled, and the cave seemed to exhale a dark, putrid breath as the enormous anaconda slithered out, its scales glinting in the dim light. Just as it was about to lunge at the terrified man Ejike had brought, the FBI agents opened fire, sending a hail of bullets into the monstrous serpent. The creature let out a deafening screech, thrashing wildly, but the agents were relentless. Their bullets tore into its massive body, weakening it with every shot, until finally it collapsed in a grotesque heap, its body lifeless and still. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the creature itself. Ejike's victim stumbled backward, saved from a fate he hadn't even fully understood until that moment. But Ejike stood frozen, eyes wide with horror, his final avenue to wealth severed forever. The FBI agents stormed in, securing the scene and arresting him, who, under the weight of evidence and overwhelming fear, broke down and confessed. He revealed every sordid detail, the serpent, the sacrifices, the gold he had claimed at the cost of human lives. Ejike was extradited back to the United States, where he faced trial. The jury was swift in their judgment. Charged with multiple murders, his confession sealed his fate, and he was sentenced to death. A fate he accepted with a chilling sense of defeat, knowing he had nowhere left to turn. Back on the Gold Coast, the local community, disturbed by the revelations, seized control of the cave. They banned any further private expeditions or harvesting, fearing that the serpent's evil presence might have left a lingering curse. And in the end, the legendary Gold Cave was closed off, lost to history once again, a forbidden place where greed and darkness had claimed countless lives.